Chapter 12. Create a corridor and apply a standard IDOT template. So in the previous chapter we learned a little bit about templates, mainly just taking a look at one of IDOT's standard templates. So before we create our own custom template for this project, let's just kind of go through the process of applying the template to the corridor, and so you can kind of see where things are going before you attempt to create a custom template specifically for this. I think it'd probably be helpful to kind of know where we're going with this and have a little experience with where we're going with this, and then coming back and then learning about creating your own customized template. Okay, here we go. Let's go ahead and get into a file named COR, which stands for corridor. And a project can have multiple corridors, and probably will have multiple corridors, and then there will be a master corridor that all of those corridors are referenced to. So this job is short enough to where we're only dealing with just one corridor. So we're going to get into that corridor file. And it should be blank. There shouldn't be anything in that file right now. Let's see what we notice. Oh, not this one. This is the wrong folder. Instead, let me browse to where the student folder is located. And I'm going to open up that corridor file. But like I was saying, this should have been a blank file, and is a blank file. It's actually it's going to start off as a 2D file, like we said in the beginning. All the seed files that you use to get started are all going to be 2D files with really only a couple exceptions, and that is definitely one exception, and that is the existing terrain is only a 3D file, so you're going to use a 3D file for that. Possibly a proposed terrain would probably also be 3D, but most files, almost all files, are 2D files, but they have a 3D model inside of that 2D seed file, if that makes any sense. New concept, lots of new concepts. Okay, here we go. Let's start off by referencing in some of the files that we've been using up until this point. You can go to Home, Attach Tools, References, should bring up that dialog for you. And then we're just going to path out to the alignment file, first of all. If we had already done some design work, we might want to point to that, or we haven't really gotten to some of this other stuff here, so I think for now we're just going to attach the alignment and the topo. I'm just going to say okay, and then we will do a fit view. And let's see, actually there's one more file you're going to need, and you need this when you're doing most everything. I'm going to attach that existing terrain. Let me make sure I'm pointing to the right location here. Student, existing terrain. And I'm going to say okay. And then we do this in most files. Normally when you bring in the terrain, you could have multiple terrain files, so you may have to tell it which one is the active terrain. What's going on here? Let's see. let's see, what is the deal here with this thing? Okay. I think I'll turn AccuDraw off, Civil AccuDraw. Yeah. There, and I'm just going to keep the video rolling because, as you know, sometimes goofy things happen and you got to work your way out of them. Okay, so I'm going to make this my active terrain model. And now I want to work towards getting that 3D model based off of one of those IDOT standardized templates. So I'm going to first go to corridors, and before I can drop any templates against this project, I first need to create a corridor. And so in the corridors tab, there's a button called New Corridor. I'm going to select that, and you don't see a profile listed right there because I hadn't selected my baseline yet. And then once I do, I think it would show up here. Yeah, there's some possible profiles in there. Or I can reset, and that says, and that, I almost always do that. I say I want to use the active profile. Remember when we developed a profile, when we finished with it, we made it the active profile. So if I reset now, I make it the active profile. Now here, predefined name was given. I'm just going to go with it. I could change the name of this corridor, especially if I had, multiple corridors that were adjacent to one another. I would probably want more of a logical name, but this job only has one corridor, so it doesn't really matter. And then, like everything else, notice there's the corridor actually has a feature definition. And we're going to start off with that corridor just being a design feature definition, and that's going to have to do with the spacing of this template, the template drops, how segmented your job is, that sort of thing. When you're not finished with the project, and depending on your processing speed on your computer, you may not want to be working as if it's the final. We'll switch to the final later, and so you don't see all the segmentation. Everything would be nice and smooth. But during the design process, I'd probably leave that set to design. And let's go with that. Alright, so there's my corridor. My corridor really doesn't contain any templates yet until I assign one to it. In fact, if I wanted to, I could point to some template at this point, or I could get out and I come back and I can drop multiple templates against that corridor later. But since I already know what template I want to use, remember we copied that IDOT template under project templates, and so yeah, I'm going to go ahead and apply that template against this corridor. So I just data point to accept, and then it asks me, well, where do you want to start this particular template? And I'm just going to go with the beginning to the end of the project for this class project. Take my mouse all the way to the end. I could either type in the start, or I can dynamically move my cursor over and accept it that way. Go to the end, accept it, and then by default, those intervals, that segmentation is going to be every 10 feet, and that's because we're using a feature definition for design that is preset to 10 feet. But I could still change that if I wanted to at this point, but that's the default for design feature definition for corridors. So I'm going to data point to accept, and when I do that, my template is dropped. Right now I'm just looking in the 2D file, and so let's talk about what we're seeing here. We're seeing the corridor, and see those yellow lines sticking out? Those are handles for that corridor. I can grab those anywhere. So a couple things that are kind of important here is that the corridor in this 2D view. And then notice this white dashed line underneath. that's the template drop. And so normally what you would have is multiple template drops within a project. You know, it's might be 500 feet long or something like that. And so when you click on the template, or I mean the corridor, it's going to be the entire length of your project. But if you click on like this white line, the template, then it may only be a portion of it if you have multiple templates. And once that template is dropped, we can modify it and all this. But I guess before we get into that kind of thing, let's see what we actually created here. Since we have some 3D work in this file now, a 3D model should have already been created, and there it is right there. And so we can view both at the same time, like we've talked before. We hold the right button down, view control, view plan 3D, release. Oh no, we don't see that too often, but if you do, just exit out of it. If that doesn't take you out of ORD completely, of course, you can always do Control-Alt-Delete. And I'm just going to leave this in the video because it does occasionally happen. Not very often, honestly. Nothing like Power Geopack used to when we attempted to use Open Roads technology in that. For those of you that tried that out, that it crashed like crazy. This is really not common. A couple times a day at most, maybe, where you got to get out back in, but you know, nothing horrible. And so I'm just getting back into that corridor file, and it'll be fine. Once I do so, then we will then just take a look at the 3D model, the result that we got from applying a standard IDOT template to the corridor. And so it's going to bring me back into ORD based on, you know, whatever some of my saved settings were, just as, you know, you're used to in the past from other software such as Power Geopack. So let me do a fit view, go back down to where our projects are located. Again, I'm going to right click, view control, 3D, and there it is right there. And we've talked already a little bit about viewing within a 3D model. So let's go ahead and make view 2 our active view. Then when we select rotate, we're going to get that dynamic option. We're going to snap to something, and then you can spin it around that point, and then use your roller on your mouse to kind of move around. If you zoom in, zoom out, there you go. And so here you can see using an IDOT template at, you know, just the their standard templates, 12 foot wide, you know, probably a 4 foot pavement, you know, all these things. Probably a 1 to 4 slope. It's just a standard IDOT template, and that would be the result you would get if you applied it against our corridor, the corridor that you created against our proposed alignment and profile that you developed. Okay, so let's leave it at, well, maybe one little thing before we move on. Once you apply that template, and sometimes you do have to get out in a file, it doesn't always show up initially, but eventually it will show up. Your template drop will show up here, and it looks like it is showing up now. So under Open Roads Model, Corridors, the feature definition of design, there's that corridor name. If I expand it just a little bit further, I can see all the templates that are dropped against that corridor. And there it is right there. So what it did was it actually copied from the ITL. So it's ORD is not actually pointing back to that ITL file, because as you know, in ORD, most everything is directly in the design files. It doesn't really point to anything else. So what it did was it actually copied that template into the design file. In fact, if I wanted to, I could right click on that template and say, hey, let's edit that template drop. I could do this right here. And we do that, sometimes. Maybe there's something about it you wanted to change. I double click on that point ref, and the lanes were only 11 feet wide. Something like that. I hit apply. Well, actually, that'd be kind of harder to see a little bit. Maybe I should do something drastic so you'll notice it. Let's select a point here, and let's make that value something super flat so it looks extremely different. Or no, I guess I would want to go like 5. Something. I just want to go extreme so it shows up very clearly to you. So when I say OK, now watch that 3D model. So just on that one side, on that left side, I changed the force slope, and you saw the model automatically processes, or heals itself. Now you can change the template that way. The way I generally prefer to do it is that I usually have all my project templates, and I like to keep those up to date, because oftentimes you're using the same template against multiple corridors. So generally I would rather just go back and change that one template in the ITL file and then resync up this template that's actually in the design file. To me, that's a better workflow, but you can do one or the other. So let's go ahead and do that. I will right click, and I'm going to say synchronize with the library. Well, I made that edit to the template, and it changed it in this design file, but it did not change it in the library, my project templates. So I'm going to synchronize. It's giving me a little warning, hey, this is different. And I say, yeah, go ahead and synchronize it. Overwrite what I just changed. And now I'm kind of back to where I started. And if I had multiple templates, well, actually, if I had one template and I had multiple corridors, see, I would only have to change that once. I would go to corridors, template, make that change one, point to it, change it, save it, get out, and then go into Explorer, and then all my templates would be listed. I would right click on each one and say, hey, resync up all these template drops, which are the same template, coming from the same template in the library, and resync them up. So then I only had to make that change one time, and it just makes you more efficient. So let's go ahead and end that chapter here, and we will move on to whatever's in the next chapter.